Hi, boys and girls. This is Grandma Sheilla, and our story today is called A Fortress in the Church. Well, this story happened about 1909. There were two men in that little Armenian church. And the elder, he went up front. There on the front of the church was a big family Bible. And it was bound in leather. It was a beautiful Bible. And the one man, he said to the other man, he said, "We can't leave it. We'll have to leave something else. We have to take our Bible. It's too precious to us." Well, during that time, the people in Armenia, most of them didn't have Bibles of their own at home. So the only Bible they had was the shared Bible at the church. So it really was precious to them. This was in Syria. And the Turkish people didn't like Christians. They didn't like anybody that believed in Jesus. And so they made big armies, and they were going out to get rid of all the Christians. Well, on this day, there was a shout that went up in their village, and they said, "The Turks are coming, the Turks are coming." Well, everybody knew what that meant. They grabbed their absolute necessities. The people were all very poor, so they didn't have a lot anyway. But they grabbed their children and a little food and what they thought they absolutely had to have. And they started as fast as they could go out the village, up into the mountains. They felt if they could get far enough in the mountains, they would be safe. Well, they all started up that mountain trail. They had their little children and their little bundles with them, and they went as fast as they could go. But as the day wore on, they started getting tireder and tireder. And the people toward the back of that long group of people noticed that people were starting to drop their little bundles along the side of the path. They were just too tired to carry them anymore. Well, the elder, he had his children with him. And he had the Bible under one of his arms. The further he went, the tireder he got, and that Bible weighed so much. Finally, it was getting close to dark, and they still had a long ways to go up that mountain. He just couldn't carry it any longer. And he looked up and he said, "God, I'm so sorry. I just can't carry it anymore." So on the side of the road, he saw a big rock that was kind of flat on the top, and he carefully set that precious Bible on top of it. He felt so bad, but he had his children, and by this time, children up and down that long string of people were starting to cry. They were so tired, and their little legs couldn't carry them any farther. And parents were having to pick them up and carry them. They continued on up that mountain. Finally, they came to a small village. Maybe, just maybe, this would be a safe place. Well, they went to the church. It was dark now, And they went inside, and they all sat on the floor as quiet as they could, and they'd locked the church doors. And there they waited, hoping that maybe the Turks wouldn't get this far. Well, further down the mountainside, there was a young woman with her 2 children. She was way behind all the other people. She had to try to carry what little bit she could with her and to get her children up the mountain. And now it was dark. Finally, she said to her kids, "I'm so tired, I've got to stop and rest." She felt around in the darkness, and on the side of that road, really wasn't a road, just a path, she felt a rock. And she went to sit on it, but there was something on it. She took her hands and she felt out there on that rock to see what it was. And she thought, it's made out of leather, and it's about this big. It must be the Bible from our church. And somebody just left it here. How could they leave it? But she knew that everybody was probably as tired as she was. But then she thought, I can't leave the Bible. So she put down the blanket that she was going to use to keep her children warm, and she put her baby under one arm and that big Bible under the other, and encouraged her other little one to follow behind. Well, finally they got to that little village, and as I said, it was very dark, and she thought, I've got to find the church. So she made her way through that little village till she came to a Christian church. She looked around, and it seemed that nobody had seen her. She went up to the door, and she knocked quietly, and she said, "This is Angie and my kids. If there's somebody in there, please let me in." Well, the door opened about that far, and eyes looked out at her, and they went, shh. So Angie and the Bible and her baby and her toddler scooted in through the doorway, and there were several hundred Christians all sitting off the floor. When she got inside and went to sit down, the person right behind her said, "You have the Bible. You have the church Bible. We have it now with us." And she whispered to the next person whispered to the other person, until everybody knew the Bible was there with them. Well, then one of the ladies very quietly said, "I have a little candle." Another one of the men said, "And I have a match." Well, a whole group of the ladies stood up, and Armenian ladies always wore long skirts that went clear to the floor, and they made a circle in the middle of the church. And a couple of the men got down on the floor, and they lit with that match, that tiny little candle, and they put it so it would stand up, and everybody was excited. And somebody said, "Yes, let's read the promises of God." So they decided to read from Psalms 91, which is such a wonderful chapter of promises. And this is part of what they read. He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. I will say unto the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God. In Him will I trust. Surely He shall deliver thee. Thou shalt not be afraid for the terror by night, nor for the arrow that flieth by day. And they read on and on until that little candle burnt further and further and further down and went out. And everybody, they quietly looked at each other and they said, God's our fortress. He's going to protect us. He's going to take care of us. They felt so much better. All that several hundred Christians lay down on the floor, being as quiet as they could. Well, that circle of ladies with their long skirts had completely shadowed the light of that candle, so nobody from the outside could see that there was anybody in there. But during the night, they heard a pounding on the door and a whole group of marching people with their swords. And that crowd, it was almost like a mob, came up to the church. And they pounded on the door. They didn't knock, they pounded on it. Open the door, you Christians. You who believe in Jesus. Come out, or we'll set your church on fire around you. Come out. We'll take care of you. And all the people inside kept holding on to those verses that God was their refuge and their fortress. Well, not one sound was made inside of that church. And that mob said again, We know you're in there. You come out. But nobody moved and nobody went out. Well, 2 days and 2 nights, they sat quietly in that church. When there was any light from the outside, they would quietly, in a whisper, share from God's Word, the Bible. And it kept them strong and realizing that God was with them and taking care of them. Well, the morning of the 3rd day, they noticed they didn't hear the mob, but there was a little knock on the door, and a voice said, You can come out now. The Turks have gone away. They're gone. You can come out. Well, this was a friendly villager. So the Christians did come out, and the villagers made a circle around him, and they said, You wouldn't believe what happened. For over 2 days, those soldiers tried to light a fire to the church, but the church wouldn't light. They even climbed up on the roof, and they made a hole, and they poured kerosene into the attic and tried to put a fire in there. Even the kerosene wouldn't light. And the Christians said, God was our refuge. He did care for us, even though those soldiers had arrows, just like the verse said. They couldn't get to them. God had protected them. Yes, their God had protected them. And they had held on to the writings in the Bible that God has given to all of us to assure us that He's with us no matter what's going on. Even if Satan tries to do bad things to us, He will protect us. Thank you, boys and girls. I will see you next week. Bye-bye now.